The opioid crisis has cost Michigan taxpayers millions of dollars. Now some counties are taking a stand and fighting to get your money back. I'm joined with a colleague, Paul Novak from Weitz-Luxenberg. Our firms have done work together for a real long time in drug cases, pharmaceutical cases, defective medical device cases, asbestos cases, etc. And now we're working together on this emerging opioid litigation.
And I'm excited about working together on it. I think it's going to be a very challenging project, but one that's going to ultimately regain taxpayer dollars for a lot of our Michigan municipalities and counties.
Yeah, it is both societally important and financially impactful for counties and municipalities that have spent an enormous amount of money contending with the opioid litigation. So Paul, I want to talk a little bit about the general theory behind the litigation, what's happening. This seems to be occurring relatively quickly, emerging rapidly.
Let me talk first about just the nature of the crisis. Because there have been times in this country's history where we've had, I think, epidemics related to different types of drugs that have been introduced to the American people. But we've had nothing in terms of just the order of magnitude that the opioids have emerged with in the last 10 or 15 years that even comes close. If you look at, heroin usage in the 70s or crack cocaine in the 80s or 90s, there were costs associated with those, but nowhere near the explosion of costs, the carnage that's essentially being created as a result of people dying. There have been over 30,000 deaths annually attributable to opioid addiction. The healthcare costs, the productivity costs, the lost wages, the families who are being ripped apart, the child protective services that take children from addicted parents. And all of those things, although they place a great cost, obviously, on the addict and their families, but they're also straining governmental resources. There are incarceration costs, obviously, that counties and the state confront. But in addition to that, there are a whole array of other things. There are emergency response costs for ambulance runs treating addicted and overdosed individuals. The child protective stuff that I mentioned, the costs associated with adjudicating all of those issues that arise when an addict has to be separated from their children. There are also the costs associated with, and we had a county that discussed this with us just the other day, their coroner contract with the local hospital had to be completely redone. They were seeing a cost increase just attributable to performing autopsies in opioid addiction deaths.
We had a meeting with another colleague of yours from Weitz-Luxenberg where they're running a millage in this county to cover the costs that they're incurring, some of the costs incurred related to opioids. And other municipalities in the city of Detroit, where we are now, opioids lead to heroin in many instances, and there are costs related to that as well.
Yes.
So it's extensive and far-reaching.
And the other point I would make is it's not focused on one specific portion of the state. This is an epidemic that really confronts the entire segment of society.
Why municipalities and not individual people who have been affected by this?
There certainly is, I think, an appropriate place for individual cases to be brought when people confront those issues and have had opioids that have been inappropriately prescribed. But separate and aside from that, one of the most important things to convey to the drug manufacturers and the wholesale distributors who have engaged in inappropriate distribution of the product is that you need to bear the costs of the irresponsible marketing, the irresponsible deceptive conduct associated with attempting to convince physicians that these products are not addictive, and also the costs associated with the distribution, when distribution in some instances by wholesalers are at such volumes that they have to know that the amounts that they're distributing are not for
we were
proper
talking, there was
purposes.
a county in Macomb County in Michigan where there's about 850,000 approximately, 850,000 citizens in that county, men, women, and children of all ages.
Yeah.
There were over 1 million opioid prescriptions written in that, or delivered in that, to that county a year or two ago.
Well, and that's a
example.
number that is replicated almost on a statewide basis. For every man, woman, and child who live in the state of Michigan, there are 1.07 prescriptions written on an annual basis for opioids.
Yeah.
We have more prescriptions for opioids than we do people in this state.
So what are the typical legal theories that you know, this is clearly developing.
Sure.
But there's nuisance, there's what are the things that
There
we're
are
looking at together?
there are
Why
a
don't we
number
talk
of things. One of the most fundamental common law causes of action that has been recognized for really centuries is public nuisance. That certain conduct creates such a cost on society as a whole that it becomes a public nuisance. And counties, municipalities, the state, all have the ability to say, hey, this public nuisance is impacting us, impacting our citizenry, and we are seeking not only disgorgement of profits associated with the offending activity, but also to change the way business is being done on a prospective basis. And those are appropriate things to accomplish through a public nuisance theory. In addition to that, consumer protection statutes are sometimes looked to as a claim that can be made not only on behalf of consumers, but on behalf of governmental entities who confront the costs associated with deceptive conduct. In the context of opioids, there have been clear patterns of deceptive marketing activity to physicians to result in oversubscribing, or over-prescribing, I should say, the use of opioid products. And that type of deceptive conduct is actionable under the Consumer Protection Act, the Michigan Consumer Protection Act. So that's another claim that could be made on behalf of a county or a city. A third is a RICO violation. There is such an organized web of activity amongst a whole array of different manufacturers and distributors of these products that RICO is an appropriate action to take. And so those are some of the fundamental causes of action that a governmental entity could look at.
A lot of people have compared this to, it's in some ways accurately, in other ways not necessarily a perfect comparison, but to tobacco, tobacco 2.0.
Sure. I think some of the things that are very similar between the two are the massive amounts of costs that are incurred and imposed upon the public. The addiction that both of the products result in for the people who use them. And the imposition of the costs associated with that addiction, not only on those individuals, but on society as a whole. Those are all similar aspects. Probably the one difference in how I think these litigations will be handled is that when tobacco was ultimately resolved, the settlements went by and large to the states. And the revenues that are attributable to those settlements have inured to the benefit primarily of the states. I think in this go-around, although a number of state attorneys general are investigating and some have brought suit on behalf of their states as a whole, I think that counties and local governments are going to want to take a stand and to recover monies other than just what might be recovered by the states.
And the tobacco litigation in Michigan many years ago recovered between $2 and $3 billion.
I think it may have been even more.
Maybe
than
more,
that.
right? And so whether this is that or something less than that, this is still an enormous. The scope and scale of this case, in terms of the damages, the people affected, is just sweeping.
Well, the social costs that have been estimated that are attributable to opioid addiction, I've seen figures as high as $47 billion. And that takes into account the lost wages of the addicts. It takes into account the reductions in productivity. It takes into account the criminal justice system costs, the emergency response costs, the healthcare costs. All of those things impose a tremendous cost on society that needs to be brought to bear in terms of the manufacturers and the distributors and their roles in imposing those costs.
Well, Paul, it's a thrill to be working together with you.
I'm really excited.
We're eager to hold these manufacturers and these distribution companies accountable and put money back in the pocket of Michigan taxpayers and the counties. Until next time, we'll see you soon on the next Bernstein Briefing.